So good news, Steinberg has released a new update for Cubase. It's version 10.5.20. And when you go onto their page, you check the release notes. There's quite a long list of things. So this is they've mentioned, and rightly so, that this is one of the biggest updates they've released for a number of years. And the reason being is because it does have some actual new features. It's not big outstanding features, but it's certainly new stuff that they've introduced that helps workflow and helps with certain different things like this here. There's a plugin report thing, safe start mode, colorizing selected channels. So it's more than just bug fixes. And you can see this list. This is all the new features. Then they've also added or done some changes to fix some bugs and some different issues that people have been experiencing. So with editing, import, export, MIDI, media bay, mixed console stuff, plugin stuff, sampler track. So you can see it's quite a long list. So you can go through. I'll leave a link in the description down below to this page so you can have a read for yourself. But I think what I'm going to do quickly is describe some of these things and just go about showing and demonstrating the usefulness and how I've actually implemented it into my workflow. This new range and event editing functions here. There's range to next event, range to previous event. So when you go into Cubase and you select the range selection tool, and wherever you have the range selector highlighted, you can change that selected range by going to the edit window, select, and from this drop-down menu, there's all these different options. They've added these four right here, and when you're in the range section, there's cut head and cut tail. And these I think are the most useful for myself for my workflow. So I'll explain these first. A cut head and cut tail, what that means is whenever you have an event, so this black highlighted thing here, this is the event in my vocal. And if I range select a section, I can do something like this, select the range and hit the delete button, and I can cut off any excess pieces. Let's say there's breath or excess noise in this section. I can do that by highlighting it, clicking the delete button. But there's some added features here in the range that's cut head and cut tail. And cut head means that anything from the range selection to the beginning of the event will be deleted. So when I go range cut head, it cuts out that section. And had I done cut tail, it's going to clip out and delete the other portion. It's certainly easy and possible to just quickly do this range selection with the mouse and then delete. But adding these as actual functions means you can then add that to a macro, or sorry, to a key command, which you can also include in a macro if you wanted to do. So what I'm actually going to be doing is going to my key commands, and I'm going to find this cut head, cut tail section. This is in the edits folder. And for cut head, I'm going to actually assign this to a function, to a keyboard key, which is going to be this square bracket. And for the tail, it's going to be the right square bracket. And for those of you who don't really know how the key command system here works, you first type in a key, and that can be a combination of keys. So let's say Control and the bracket, or just the bracket in this section, and it's going to tell you if it's been assigned to any sort of function in Cubase. So for instance, I hit the period button and it's already assigned to this transport function. So this is handy in the fact that you can try out some combinations of things, see if they're assigned to anything. If not, then you highlight the function you want to assign that key command to, and then assign it right here. Now you can see it's assigned to edit cut head. Now when I do the tail, same thing, assign it, and then I can actually save this and store it as a preset so that I can always have a set number of key command presets and macros to whatever version of Cubase I put this to. If I take this information and I move it to my laptop, I can have the same key command preset on my laptop and all the different devices that I bring this to. Now, for the macros, if you're not familiar with macros are, is you have a string of functions that happen in succession automatically. So you can create a string of different functions and then assign that to an actual key command. So you can do a whole bunch of different things. You can do something like highlight the entire events for all tracks and duplicate the track and then mute whatever. Like you can do a whole list of combination of things. So now that I have that assigned to a key command, it's now very easy for me to just be able to quickly go hover around in the different sections and delete just based off of a little simple mouse click. So that may or may not speed up your workflow. The other additions is the selection pieces here. So if I kind of just zoom out and scroll over to the left of these events, when I go edit select and enlarge range to next event, you'll see it goes from where I had it selected and enlarges the selection range to the very beginning of that event. So that can be pretty handy for key commands and macros. And then there's also just the range to previous and next event. So let's say range to next event. It moved to that beginning of the event. And now I click select enlarge range to next event. Now it's highlighted just that single event. So this can be really, really handy in another key command or a macro or whatever I was explaining before. That's the key thing here, is that it creates it as a actual function that's in the menu system that can then be assigned to key commands and macros. And another thing here, the plugin report. So if you go into the VST plugin manager, which is under Studio, VST, where is it? Right up here on the top, VST plugin manager. So sometimes you'll get plugins that just misbehave, cause errors, crashes, different things. There's actually also a block list here. You can see VST2 is no longer supported in the newest versions of Cubase. But down here, there's a plugin report button that you can click, and it exports in text format. So let's export this to my downloads folder. Now it actually gives me a full breakdown of many, many different things. So you can see all my computer information, the version of Cubase, Windows version. It has tons and tons of information, the VST paths. Here's a breakdown of all the block list. And then here's a breakdown of all the different plugins. So this is very good for yourself, but this would also be incredibly handy for if I have a known issue with plugins and I'm sending this information to Steinberg directly. They can take all this computer information and sort of work that into their debugging process. So that's handy for a few different reasons, not necessarily creative or workflow stuff. And this one here, for anyone who's had Cubase quit unexpectedly, I actually haven't had almost any issues with Cubase for a long time now, but I have had in the past. And here, when you restart the application, the Safe Start window will show automatically. So this will help those who have issues get to the solutions faster. It'll probably point you or help you point to the source of the problem quicker. This next one here, with the addition of the colorized tracks in the mix console, you can see that whenever I highlight a track, it doesn't actually represent the color that has been colorized. It's now just a generic highlighted white gray kind of color. And they've now added a setting in the preferences where you can actually show the color for that selected track. So it's no longer a generic color, it's a brightened color of what that track was actually colorized for. So here you can see this remains blue. So that's, I think, a better option. That's probably more natural to what people would have wanted, because losing the color to begin with doesn't necessarily help when the people who wanted the preference of having color to begin with, the color makes it easily identifiable of what track this is. And you can see here that all these three tracks are supposed to be together. They're similar. They're all vocals for the bridge, and I've colored them that way for a specific reason. And when this option is not selected, it actually kind of looks like maybe this is a group track. Like, you can't tell the difference. Here's the vocal and this is a group track. I can't even tell that it's a group track, but then I move over. Okay, now I see that it is a group track. So you can see how that type of a change is definitely welcome. And here there's more key commands for grid types, which have been added. So here the grid types, these can now be assigned to an actual key command and subsequently into a macro. So again, that can help some people with their workflow if you're switching between that constantly. This here, I'm not actually familiar with the project cursor being shortened when you use the video follows edit mode, but that has been changed. The remove multiple buses, this is pretty handy for people who have multiple buses and need to reconfigure things in large scale. So before, you would have had to remove individually, one by one, whatever buses you've created. Now you can highlight as many as you want and remove selected buses all together at once. The direct offline processing window, you can now reset the audio processes to their default settings, so that's pretty handy. This one's kind of cool. You can adjust the event opacity. So in the preferences, in edit preferences, and in event display, right here you can adjust the event opacity. So I'm going to change that. You can see when I click apply, it's changing the opacity. So that's kind of cool. You can have a somewhat alternate customization in that sense. I will probably just stick to the default. And the last one of these new features is you can customize the appearance of the level meters for all the available scales. So they've added a drop-down menu. So I believe you can customize each scale individually. So it's no longer a more generic type of metering. You can customize for each individual scale. And lastly, I'll just quickly run through some of the rest of these things here. So this here, preference, suspend VST plugin processing when no audio signals are received. This is a VST 3 feature that technically it's supposed to help with reducing CPU load, because when there's no audio, it's basically supposed to bypass the plugin and reduce total amount of CPU usage. This, as a preference, is going to be switched off by default, and it helps prevent some technical compatibility issues with third-party plugins. And it's supposed to also improve the general ASIO load by having it switched off. I actually think that I've noticed occasionally some plugins that, like they said, with third-party plugins, but I do remember them having a weird glitch where the very first part of when the audio comes in, it had some extra noise or a clicking, or the audio would kind of be like affected in some way. And then from there on, it was no longer affected. And I think that's probably what they're talking about, or at least one of the compatibility issues. I believe I've also had issues when I was exporting a complete song in offline mode, and the resulting export had some audio missing or extra clicking noise when audio comes in. And this was very, very rare. This was like, I think maybe 2 or 3 times I noticed this in projects over basically, I don't know how many years, 5, 6 years now. And having that off by default might prevent most people from ever having that type of issue to begin with. There's also some MIDI clock latency compensation issues that have been fixed. They've also improved some MIDI clock latency compensation issues. And I think I've run into this issue, and they actually make mention to this when you're using external instruments. And this is, I think, what I've been sort of running into, and it's very, very rare and occasional. But what I have run into is when I've played something in MIDI and there's supposed to be some MIDI compensation based off of the buffer size you've selected, and it seemed to be out of sync. I don't think this is the latest version of Cubase that I've run into this. I think it might have been somewhere around version 9 where I had the most notable compensation issues. But either way, it's good that they're proactively looking at that and making changes to fix it. And with the EQ plugin, the frequency plugin, there was some compatibility stuff, some very specific things here, like when you have a band set to a notch and it didn't work correctly in the phase linear mode. So like very specific issues. Looks like they fixed that. And then, like I mentioned, here's all the editing stuff, the import, export, just quite a load of stuff that they've fixed. So now that I've walked through all of that stuff, you can see why this is one of the biggest updates that they've released in recent years. But one thing I would note, which is a little odd to me, is that Cubase version 10.5, I think, has been, for me at least, on a Windows machine, it has been the most stable release from the get-go. So without any additional updates to 10.5, I have not run into almost any issues at all with stability, with any sort of technical issues, with crashes, with like you name it. There's basically almost nothing I've run into. They had a couple iterations. I think it was, if you go into here, the new project, the Steinberg Hub, they list any news. So you'll actually see the Cubase update right here. But let's see, there's Cubase version 10.5.10. There was a hot fix. I think that was for Mac OS Mojave. And then there was the 10.5.12. And I didn't notice any difference in these two updates. I just did them and everything was still working as normal. But yeah, what's interesting to me is that even though this is like the most stable release out of the box from the bare bones release of 10.5, they've come out with a huge list of bug fixes and some added technical abilities or workflow enhancements. It's very minor, so this is not stuff that you would want to release as version 11 as big new workflow enhancements. Like, this is cool that they've added some very small, poignant enhancements to the program. But anyways, enough rambles. Thanks for watching. Take care and see you in the next one.